So this is the second video on Doug Anderson's piece, Peirce and Cartesian Rationalism. And in this piece, Anderson is setting out to show the ways in which Peirce and Descartes have some basic objectives and goals as philosophers in common, and some of the ways in which they differ. In this video, I want to talk briefly about 5 severe criticisms that Peirce makes of Descartes. So the first one is on Descartes' idea of universal doubt, or hyperbolic doubt. Peirce argues that Descartes' idea of universal doubt, or complete hyperbolic doubt, is just not experientially possible. He says, "We cannot begin with complete doubt. We must begin with all the prejudices which we actually have when we enter upon the study of philosophy." This is a very important quote for Peirce because it indicates that his starting point for philosophical theory, for scientific experiments and theorizing in science, everything comes back to the fact that we're in the middle of our lives, we're living our lives. This is where we start. We cannot remove ourselves to a tower where we free ourselves of bodily cares and interactions with other people. Reasoning happens in the world, in the middle of our lives, at the time and the place that we live, from the perspective that we have. It is situated. And so Descartes' project of universal doubt, his idea that we could set a foundation for philosophy and for science by doubting in advance everything which could be doubted and then building up from there, is a complete fantasy, and it's not possible. It's not something we can actually do. It was arbitrary. Descartes never fully actualized it. You can see when students read the Meditations for the first time, they point out all of the different assumptions that Descartes is making as he goes along, supposedly doubting everything. And for Peirce, it's not only not possible, it's actually, in a way, it's kind of dangerous. Because Peirce points out that when people pretend to doubt, instead of doubting based on their actual circumstances, they wind up not believing anything, quite possibly. They wind up having inquiries which are useless or idle or made up. They can deceive oneself. So, for example, imagine if someone pretended to doubt that the coronavirus was real, right? This would make investigations into the virus very arbitrary, very fantastical, and maybe it might actually wind up canceling all possible inquiries into the source of the virus. And this would have very serious consequences for our health, well-being, and of course, for scientific progress. So, pretend doubt detaches inquiry from actual circumstances, from the world, from nature, from real physical laws, from facts in the world. It's not a good way to proceed. So we have to start with what we know and refine it, make it better, right? Correct it where we can. But we do not start from some idealized standpoint. This is probably one of the most important insights in Peirce and in pragmatism. A second criticism that Peirce makes of Descartes, which is quite severe, is Descartes' reliance on intuition. He says, there's no evidence that we can do this. That's not a direct quote, but basically he says, this is not something that we do. We don't have this capacity of infallible, intuitive knowing. If we did, if we had this method, this ability, why would we disagree over the beliefs that we have intuitively? We would have lots of people who had had these intuitive a priori insights, and there would be all of this completely firm, unshakable agreement. That's not what we find. So Descartes' method of intuition supposedly reveals some criteria in the Meditations of clarity and distinctness. Peirce assails this as being similarly impossible because the perception that something is clear and distinct relies on the faculty of intuition, which we don't have. So we don't have the criteria of clarity and distinctness, which are the linchpin of the Meditations, because we don't have the faculty which is supposedly capable of revealing them to us, the faculty of intuition. So that's the second criticism. The third criticism I'd want to bring up is that Peirce argues that Descartes is wrong to think that inquiry is something that you do by yourself, that inquiry is fundamentally, it's communal, it's social. And anyone who's read and studied Descartes realizes that as soon as he was done with the meditations, and even while he was writing it, he sent drafts out to people, he asked them for their feedback, he asked them for corrections, for responses. So even in the way that Descartes went about writing and composing and revising the meditations shows that inquiry is a communal and a social affair. As it's portrayed in the meditations, inquiry is a solitary affair, right? One where you remove external distractions, and then you pursue truths through intuition and deduction, and then this leads to, right, genuine beliefs or authentic, unshakable certainties. Peirce argues that, it's not like we're trying to find that one single thread of argument which is completely indestructible. Rather, argument's like a cable of strands woven together. You discover something, I discover something that works with it, and this is how argument works. It weaves together strands like in a cable, and it's a socially constructed strand of things that, say, a group of scientists put together, and then they test it in the world and see if it works. So inquiry for Peirce is a communal process. It doesn't proceed by a universal doubt. It comes about because there are problems that just won't go away, and there's a social impulse that we have to sort of square our beliefs with the beliefs of other people. And so when you find out someone else believes something other than you, you might have noticed that there's this kind of impulse you have, sort of figure out, well, am I thinking the right thing? Is this right? Why do they believe that? What's the deal? So there's this sort of you might say it's this acculturated response to disagreement or to contrary beliefs that prompts us to figure out where the disagreement is coming from. And so this, for Peirce, was an important reason or an indicator that all of inquiry was inherently social in nature. There are things we investigate by ourselves, but we come back together and there's an interdependency and an intercommunicative nature to inquiry. The third severe criticism that I think is worth mentioning is Descartes has a certain idea of what inquiry is, what the goal of inquiry is, I should say. Peirce disagrees with the goal of inquiry as described by Descartes. For Descartes, the goal of inquiry is certainty, is absolute truth. For Peirce, the goal of inquiry is to try to find a more likely answer to something, right? Ultimately, what we'd like to do is have a certain answer to our questions, like how long is the sun going to exist? Why do human beings get into war? I mean, in a certain ideal way, what we're aiming at is beliefs that won't change any further. But what we actually wind up looking for in day-to-day life in inquiry, the goal is agreement based on the best arguments and the best observational and empirical facts that we can find. So there's two very different goals for inquiry, and Peirce thought that Descartes was wrong to aim at certainty. Aiming at agreement and the resolution of doubt that caused the inquiry in the first place was important. The next criticism to mention is that Peirce disagreed with Descartes about the role of the perception and the senses in inquiry. Right? If you remember from the meditations, Descartes wanted to just think. He just wanted to meditate. Right? He wanted to get away from his body and the distracting and error-producing influences of the senses and come to intuitive, theoretical, purely cognitive truths. Perception for Descartes was a distraction, it was limiting, it was confusing, it prevents certainty, and we have to, in fact, doubt our senses in order to get to the fundamental truths that the system that he wants to build must rest on. For Peirce, perception is part of experience, and it's a key to any inquiry, and it's often the origin of many inquiries, right? It's some feeling that I have that doesn't feel right, and I start to investigate it. There's some gut feeling that something is wrong. So there's a lot about sensation which has a role in inquiry for Peirce, which is, it may it may lead to the generation of inquiry, or it may play a role during inquiry, but it's part of experience, and though it's fallible, it must be a partner with deduction and reasoning and cognition in the solving of problems and the fixation of belief. So I think that's the severe criticisms I want to mention, and I hope that I've brought out what's probably most important about the tension between Peirce and Descartes. So just in summary, Peirce rejects Descartes' method because it's radical, it's too wholesale, it doesn't put doubt to work in a useful way. It shifts us from sort of critical common sense, as he calls it, to immediate intuition, which is a capacity he doubts we actually have. And it shifts us from sort of fallible, progressive, constructive truth, or truth-making, you might say, to this goal of certainty which doesn't seem to have any contact with our bodies, with the natural world, with the political and social and economic realms in which we live every day. So Peirce is a much different world picture than Descartes. And it's shot through with risk, it's shot through with failure. These are ineliminable components to reality for Peirce. And he was hopeful that by finding ways to cooperate in something like scientific inquiry, but it's really broader than that, we might find beauty, goodness, and truth in the world by hard work and by social connections and relationships. So that's the gist of the Doug Anderson article, Peirce and Cartesian Rationalism. We'll have a chance to discuss this more, I'm sure.